Tonight we slip quietly into the steaming, emerald world of ancient Cambodia, a place where the sky's mood swings can make or break your year. You're standing barefoot in a parched rice paddy, the earth beneath you cracked into a jigsaw of dusty plates. The heat sticks to your skin like a stubborn debt collector. And then, without warning, the heavens let loose. Sheets of water slam into the ground so hard they bounce back into your face. You almost laugh, but then it hits you. This isn't just a refreshing shower. This is the start of the monsoon, and you probably won't survive this unless you learn fast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rain has its own smell here, part earth, part grass, and part something older, like the breath of the jungle itself. In minutes, the once cracked field is a shallow brown mirror, rippling with every raindrop. At first, you think this is salvation. After all, without the monsoon, there's no rice. But the elders, their faces as lined as the riverbanks, remind you that too much water is just as deadly as none. They talk about years when the paddies drowned and the rice rotted in place, when families had to boil weeds to make soup. You squint toward the horizon, where dark clouds muscle in from the southwest. This, they say, is the wet phase of the climate's great pendulum. 6 months of rain, so heavy it can collapse roofs. The rest of the year, you'll be praying for even one soggy afternoon. Historians still argue whether the ancient Khmers saw this rhythm as a blessing from the gods or a cruel test. But the farmers here don't have the luxury of debating. They adapt, or they starve. The first crash of thunder shakes your ribs. The kids run out, shrieking with delight, sliding in the mud like it's a festival. The older farmers glance at the sky with a practiced eye, judging whether this will be a gentle soaking or the kind that rips young rice seedlings right out of the ground. You notice how they read the wind the way some people read a favorite novel, catching small shifts in its tone. A droplet of cold rain slides down your neck, reminding you that you're part of this, too. The community starts its quiet choreography, pulling out bamboo screens to slow the water's rush, digging temporary trenches to guide excess flow away from the lowest paddies. You join in, your toes gripping the mud. The work is heavy, but the air smells alive. One old man, his teeth stained red from betel nut, tells you a quirky tale about how the rain used to come only when a certain white elephant sneezed. You laugh, but he swears he's seen it in the stars. Whether that's myth or meteorology, you can't tell, and honestly, it doesn't matter. It's part of the mental armor that helps people here face each new season. Night falls early under a sky like wet slate. The rain steady drumming on thatched roofs feels almost hypnotic. You think of the delicate balance these farmers live with, water as both salvation and destroyer. Somewhere upstream, rivers are swelling, and you wonder how much of that water will reach you, and how much will spill over and flatten entire fields. A frog croaks nearby, so loud you'd think it was auditioning for lead singer in a swamp rock band. In the flicker of lightning, you see its shiny eyes, nature's little reminder that the rain is life for more than just humans. You settle under the eaves, mud still clinging to your shins, and feel that mix of relief and apprehension that defines the start of the wet season. Tomorrow, you'll see if the young rice shoots have survived their first real test. Tonight, you just listen to the rain, knowing that somewhere out there, it's already plotting its next move. By morning, the rain has eased into a steady drizzle, the kind that soaks through your shirt before you realize you're wet. The air smells like damp earth and green things waking up. Mist curls over the paddies, and you can hear the river gurgling somewhere beyond the tree line. You're not heading to the fields today. Not yet. Today's work is about persuasion. Not persuading people, but persuading water. The elders lead you into the jungle, carrying spades, woven baskets, and a stubborn determination. The ground squelches under your feet, sucking at your sandals as you push forward. Soon, you reach a low area where the trees part just enough for the sun to glint off a thin, sluggish stream. This, they explain, is where the new canal will begin. Without it, the fields closest to the village will flood too quickly, drowning young crops before their roots take hold. With it, the excess water will be guided somewhere useful, perhaps into a pond for fish or low paddy that needs more moisture. You plant your spade into the mud and start digging. It's hard work. Every scoop feels heavier than the last. You pause to catch your breath and spot something strange. A perfectly round, flat stone half buried in the muck. A farmer chuckles and says it's probably part of an old canal marker from decades ago, when another group tried the same project. That canal failed after a single season. Historians still argue whether ancient Khmer engineers planned every waterway meticulously, or whether they just built, prayed, and hoped the monsoon didn't laugh at them. Hours pass in a blur of mud, sweat, and the occasional leech that treats your ankle like an all-you-can-eat buffet. By midday, your arms feel like you've been wrestling water buffalo. Speaking of which, you hear a loud snort behind you. A farmer's buffalo has wandered over. perhaps curious about this new ditch in its grazing territory. You half joke that maybe it wants to help dig. The farmer shakes his head. Too smart for that, he says. The jungle fights back against your efforts. Roots twist into the trench like they're trying to reclaim it. You hack at them with a small machete, the sap oozing out in sticky beads. The smell is sharp and green, almost citrusy. A thin snake darts away from the commotion, disappearing into a tangle of vines. Someone mutters a short prayer. Old superstition says snakes are the guardians of waterways, and disturbing them without permission can curse your harvest. By late afternoon, the canal takes shape, a narrow, muddy vein stretching from the stream toward the open paddies. The farmers move in a rhythm, some digging, others hauling away loosened earth, and a few building small, woven bamboo gates to control the water flow. You're impressed by the precision. They know just how steep to make the gradient so water moves but doesn't rush. It's not math on paper, it's math in their bones. As you wipe the sweat from your forehead, one of the elders tells you about a great flood decades ago. The water rose so fast it swept entire floating granaries downriver. People had to paddle after their own food stores, like a bizarre boat race with dinner on the line. You laugh, but you also notice how his eyes tighten at the memory. Floods here aren't just inconvenience, they're survival rolled into chaos. When the last spadeful is thrown aside, the farmers open the bamboo gate. A trickle becomes a stream, the muddy water swirling and carrying away bits of leaf and grass. It's hypnotic, the slow claiming of the land by water, but under human guidance. The sound is gentle, but you can feel the quiet pride in the air. As the sun dips low, you and the others head back toward the village. The canal glistens behind you, its surface catching the light like a thin ribbon of bronze. The frogs are already testing its new acoustics with their croaking. You can almost imagine the water itself sighing in relief at having a proper path. You realize that in a place where rain can destroy as easily as it nourishes, digging canals isn't just labor, it's a pact between human and river, a pact you'll be part of as long as you live here. The next morning, you're up before the sun, rubbing sleep from your eyes as the village stirs. Somewhere, a rooster is auditioning for the role of most persistent alarm clock, and losing badly to the sound of shovels clinking against stone. Today isn't about muddy canals. It's about something much bigger. Literally, you follow the farmers to the edge of an enormous construction site. At first, you think you've stumbled onto the shore of a lake, but the elders shake their heads. This is no natural pond. This is a beret, one of the giant reservoirs that keep the Khmer heartland alive through drought. The water's surface stretches so far, you can barely see the far bank through the morning haze. In the distance, workers are just specks, hauling baskets of soil and stone to raise the embankments higher. You're handed a woven basket with a flat base, perfect for carrying sand. The job is simple: fill, carry, dump, repeat. Within minutes, sweat is trickling down your back, and you've already invented 3 creative insults for whoever first suggested this was simple. But as you glance around, you realize the whole village is here. Men, women, even older children, moving like parts of one great machine. The history nerd in you perks up. Historians still argue whether these colossal berets were purely for irrigation, or if they also held ceremonial and symbolic meaning. Some suggest they mirrored the mythical lake Anavatapta from Hindu-Buddhist cosmology, a cosmic center surrounded by mountains. But the farmers here, they just see a giant life insurance policy for their crops. Every few trips, you pause to drink from a clay jar of cool water. The taste is earthy, with a hint of something metallic from the jar's firing. Beside you, a wiry old man mutters about a beret ghost that steals buckets at night. You chuckle, thinking it's just a campfire story, until a sudden gust of wind snatches a basket right out of someone's hands and dumps it into the water. The man just nods knowingly. By midday, the sun is punishing, turning the white sand blinding. You take a break near a cluster of women weaving reed mats. They explain these mats will line certain sections of the embankment to reduce erosion when the water rises high. It's a mix of practical engineering and a kind of rustic artistry, patterns forming not for beauty's sake, but because the human hand naturally works in rhythm. You haul another load of soil, stepping carefully over wooden frames where workers are setting large stone slabs. These will reinforce the spillway, the beret's safety valve, when the monsoon dumps too much at once. Without it, the entire embankment could collapse in a single catastrophic gulp, sending a wall of water racing toward the fields. The idea makes you shiver despite the heat. The gas. During a short pause, someone points toward the far shore, where the king's overseers stand under a canopy. They're making notes on palm leaf manuscripts, tracking the day's progress. You hear whispers that part of the rice tax will fund this project for years. The sheer scale is mind-boggling. These berets can hold millions of cubic meters of water, enough to keep thousands of hectares green when the rest of the land is browning under drought. By late afternoon, the air is thick with the scent of wet clay and human effort. Your shoulders ache, your palms are raw, and you've probably inhaled half a sandbox. But when you climb the embankment and look down, you feel a flicker of pride. The beret isn't finished, not even close, but already the water glimmers like a promise. A boy beside you skips a stone across the surface, watching it hop and sink. When I'm old, he says, this will still be here. You're not sure if he's right. Nature has a way of reclaiming even the grandest works. But for now, it feels like something eternal. As you trudge back to the village, the evening breeze carries the smell of cooking rice. You think of the beret behind you, slowly filling, quietly preparing for the months when the sky will be stingy. And you realize that here, survival isn't just about reacting to the weather. It's about shaping the land itself. So the weather plays by your rules, at least most of the time. By the time the Bare's embankments are stable enough to hold back a true flood, the first green carpets of rice are already unfurling across the paddies. You wade in up to your shins, the warm water hiding clouds of silt that swirl around your toes. This is the Khmer farmer's main gamble: rice, the crop that behaves like a diva at an opera house, spectacular when everything is perfect, sulky and destructive when the conditions are even slightly off. The variety you're planting isn't just any rice. It's deep water rice, bred to survive when the paddies fill high enough to cover your knees. Each seedling is a fragile slip of green, trembling between your fingers as you push it gently into the mud. You move in rhythm with the others, stepping backward to avoid trampling what you've just planted. The air is heavy with the scent of wet soil and the distant perfume of flowering banana trees. The elders have their own lore about planting days. Some say you must face east when you start, so the first sprouts will drink the sunrise. Others whisper about avoiding days when the moon looks hazy, claiming it makes the rice lazy. Historians still argue whether these customs have practical roots in old climate observation, or if they're simply the residue of centuries of ritual. Either way, nobody here is brave enough to tempt fate by ignoring them. Halfway through the day, you notice something. The water level isn't constant. The farmers are already adjusting small bamboo gates in the canals, letting just enough flow through to keep the soil damp without drowning the tender shoots. Too much water too early, and the roots will rot. Too little, and the plants will wither before their stems thicken. It's a balancing act that feels less like farming and more like tuning a delicate instrument. You pause to watch a woman who moves with such confidence. It's like the rice obeys her. She dips a clay pot into the water and pours it over a struggling clump, then uses her foot to gently firm the soil. "This one's a fighter," she says with a grin, "but fighters still need help." You make a mental note to remember that advice about rice and maybe about people. A quirky trick emerges in conversation over lunch. Some farmers mix a little ash from burned rice husks into the planting water. They claim it toughens the seedlings, like giving them a pep talk made of minerals. You taste a pinch out of curiosity. It's gritty and faintly bitter, and you're pretty sure the rice isn't listening. but nobody here doubts its effectiveness. By afternoon, the sun has turned the paddies into a shimmering mosaic. Your back aches from bending, your calves are caked in drying mud, and your hands have that pruny, soft feeling from hours of submersion. But when you straighten up and look over the field, the sight is quietly satisfying. Rows upon rows of green lines, each one a future meal, a future trade, maybe even a future offering at the temple. As you head out, you hear a story from a passing elder about a season when the rains came late. Desperate farmers tried planting anyway, only for the sky to open 2 weeks later and flood everything. They replanted, only for the rains to stop entirely. The surviving harvest was so small, people bartered jewelry for a single sack. You feel a shiver even in the warm air. Rice may look humble, but its absence is devastating. In the fading light, the paddies reflect the pink and gold of the sunset, like someone spilled molten metal across the land. You can almost imagine the fields humming softly, storing the day's warmth. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks lazily, and you catch yourself thinking the rice might actually be listening after all. The next morning greets you with the low, nasal grunt of a water buffalo somewhere outside your hut. At first, you think it's an impatient neighbor clearing their throat, but the sound deepens into a slow, rumbling complaint. When you step outside, you see it, an enormous, slate-gray beast standing in the paddy, a crown of mud on its head, like it's won some barnyard beauty contest. Today is plowing day, and the buffalo are the stars of the show. You follow one farmer, a wiry man named Dara, into the water. He loops a wooden yoke over the animal's broad neck and secures it with ropes, murmuring something low and steady. Have to start with compliments, Dara says with a half smile. Otherwise, he'll drag me into the next province. You grab the handles of the plow, a simple wooden frame tipped with a sharpened piece of iron. The buffalo takes one heavy step, then another, each hoof sinking into the mud with a satisfying squelch. The plow carves a wet furrow, curling up ribbons of soil. You quickly learn the first rule of buffalo negotiation. You don't push them, they push you. Halfway through the first row, Dara tosses a pinch of coarse salt onto his palm and offers it to the buffalo, who licks it with a long, surprisingly pink tongue. Keeps him happy, Dara says. And happy buffalo don't decide to take naps mid-row. You decide this might also work on certain humans you know. The work is slow but mesmerizing. Each step stirs up little clouds of minnows and frogs, startled from their hiding spots. The smell is a mix of fresh mud, wet grass, and something faintly sweet from the buffalo's warm hide. Historians still argue whether the Khmer preferred buffalo over oxen, purely for strength, or because their broad hooves trampled fewer seedlings. But here, the choice seems obvious. Buffalo look like they were built for this land. You pause for water, watching another farmer try to coax his younger buffalo into moving. The animal stares into the distance as if contemplating the meaning of life, then lets out a wet snort and sits down. He's still learning, the farmer says with a sigh. You can't help laughing. Apparently, stubbornness is part of the buffalo training manual. By midday, your shoulders burn from guiding the plow, and your shins are streaked with mud from the animal's tail flicks. Dara calls for a break, leading the buffalo to a shady patch where it immediately lowers itself into the mud like a boulder sinking into a pond. Keeps them cool, he explains. And no, you can't join him. As you chew on sticky rice wrapped in banana leaf, someone tells you about a flood year when the buffalo were the village's lifeline. With boats scarce, they were harnessed to drag entire platforms of supplies through chest-deep water. One even pulled a raft, carrying a wedding party to the temple on time, earning itself the title of Uncle Buffalo for years afterward. Refreshed, you return to the fields. The plowing resumes, a slow, deliberate ballet of man, beast, and mud. By the time the sun hangs low, the paddies look transformed. Neatly turned soil, ready to cradle the season's hopes. You pat the buffalo's neck in thanks, feeling the warm, rough skin under your palm. It turns its head, snorts once more, and trudges off toward the water trough, no doubt expecting another salt bribe tomorrow. You follow, your legs heavy, your clothes streaked in every shade of brown the earth can make. Somehow, though, the weight feels good, like you've earned a place in this patient, muddy rhythm of survival. The rain lightens the next morning, and the air is thick with the smell of wet palm leaves. You're not heading into the paddies today. Your path leads upward. A group of farmers waits near the base of a tall sugar palm, its trunk straight as a spear and crowned with a fan of green fronds. One man, lean and barefoot, grins at you. Time to sweeten the season, he says, patting the rough bark. You watch him loop a strip of braided rattan around the trunk, wedge his bare feet against the bark, and climb with the easy grace of someone who's done this since childhood. His movements are so fluid, you half expect him to whistle on the way up. Near the top, he leans out and slices a young flower stalk, letting its sap drip into a clay pot. Palm sugar, he calls down, keeps the hunger away when the rice runs low. When it's your turn to climb, you realize this is less like a ladder and more like negotiating with a very tall, scratchy pole. The bark bites at your skin, your calves burn, and you wonder why gravity feels twice as heavy today. By the time you reach the top, you're clinging like a nervous lizard, but the view distracts you. The fields stretch out like a green patchwork quilt, glistening under the damp sky. You fit the clay pot in place, the sap dripping slowly, steady as a heartbeat. The liquid looks like cloudy water, but when boiled down over a low fire, it becomes rich brown sugar, sweet and slightly smoky. A farmer tells you they store it in bamboo tubes or roll it into cakes, perfect for mixing into porridge or tea during lean months. There's a quirky side use too. Some swear palm sugar water is the best cure for heat stroke, while others quietly admit it makes a fine base for a potent home-brewed liquor. You're handed a cup of the fresh sap to taste. It's cool, faintly sweet, with a whisper of wildflowers. You can see why even the children treat it like a prize. Back on the ground, women tend small fires under blackened pots, the sap bubbling and thickening. The smell is intoxicating, like caramel kissed by wood smoke. A breeze carries it across the village, and you swear even the buffalo lift their heads to sniff. Historians still argue whether palm sugar was more valuable as a trade item or as a survival staple, but here its worth is clear. It's edible security. While waiting for the sap to reduce, a farmer's daughter hands you something wrapped in palm leaf. A chewy snack made of rice flour and palm sugar, sprinkled with sesame seeds. You bite into it, and it sticks to your teeth in the most stubbornly pleasant way. She laughs at your struggle and hands you a second one. For the road, she says. Later, as the finished sugar cakes are stacked in neat rows to cool, you see a quiet rhythm in this work. Unlike the urgency of planting or plowing, palm sugar collecting is patient. It's about watching the slow drip, tending the slow boil, and trusting that small, steady work will see you through the harder seasons. By evening, your arms ache from climbing, your clothes smell faintly of smoke, and your pockets hold 2 palm sugar cakes that you're trying very hard not to eat immediately. As you walk back, the sun breaks briefly through the clouds, turning the palm crowns gold. You realize that survival here isn't just about filling bellies. It's about storing sweetness for when life tastes bitter. That night, the village gathers in the open space near the largest stilt house. A fire burns low in the center, its smoke curling upward in lazy ribbons. You notice small bowls arranged in a neat circle around the flames, each one holding offerings, a splash of rice wine, a few grains of uncooked rice, and delicate flowers from the frangipani tree. The air hums with anticipation, and you soon realize this isn't just a casual get-together. Tonight is about keeping the skies friendly. The elders begin to chant, their voices low and rhythmic, almost like the distant rumble of thunder. You sit cross-legged in the dirt, watching shadows flicker across their faces. A woman leans over to explain in a whisper. We ask the spirits to balance the water. Not too much, not too little. She gestures toward the dark horizon, where clouds hover like sleeping giants. They listen if you speak right. It's easy to be skeptical until a gust of wind suddenly sweeps through, sending the flames dancing sideways. The elders don't even flinch. They just adjust their chant, weaving in the wind as if it's part of the conversation. Historians still argue whether such ceremonies had any measurable effect on agriculture, but you can feel their psychological power. When you live by the mercy of the weather, rituals aren't luxuries, they're lifelines. One man begins a story about a time when the rains failed 3 years in a row. The villagers performed this very ceremony on a night so still that even the crickets had gone quiet. By dawn, he claims, the clouds rolled in and stayed for weeks. Coincidence? He asks with a sly smile. Or good manners? You grin back, unsure which answer would keep you in the spirit's good graces. Around the fire, young boys beat small drums made from stretched animal skin, keeping a heartbeat rhythm. Women shake bundles of dried seeds, their rattling blending with the chants. A thin thread of incense smoke snakes through the air, smelling faintly of sandalwood, and something sweet you can't place. You catch yourself swaying with the rhythm, your eyelids growing heavy. Then comes a quirky twist. One elder produces a clay pot of water and begins sprinkling it over everyone's heads. To confuse the bad spirits, someone explains. They won't know if it's rain or trickery. You wipe droplets from your cheek, thinking it's a surprisingly gentle way to outsmart supernatural forces. The fire burns lower, casting the faces around you in warm, shifting light. In its glow, you notice details: the calluses on the elder's hands, the faint outlines of tattoos swirling up their arms, the way their eyes glint when they catch yours. The chant slow, becoming softer, like lullabies for the sky. By the time the ceremony ends, the night is still, but the air feels different, thicker, expectant. You walk back toward your hut, the faint smell of incense clinging to your clothes. Somewhere behind you, a frog croaks, and you imagine it as the spirit's polite. We'll see what we can do. You lie down, half believing that maybe, just maybe, the clouds will have heard tonight's plea. And if they did, you hope they're in a generous mood. 2 days later, the river swells so high it swallows its own banks. You wake to the creak of wooden stilts beneath your hut, the sound deep and deliberate, like the building itself is stretching after a long nap. But this isn't land anymore, not really. It's water, water everywhere, shimmering gold in the early light. You follow a group of neighbors down to a narrow wooden dock where a handful of boats bob impatiently. The village has entered its floating phase. Some homes are on high stilts, their ladders now half submerged, while others are lashed to bamboo rafts that rise and fall with the river's moods. You step into a canoe, its planks warm from yesterday's sun, and push off into streets that used to be paths. Everywhere you look, life has rearranged itself to match the flood. Chickens cluck from makeshift coops suspended above the water. Children paddle to each other's houses in tiny dugouts, as casual as kids on bicycles. And there, an old man casts his net from his front porch, the mesh fanning out in a silver arc before sinking with a soft plop. The boat glides past a floating vegetable garden, bundles of water, hyacinth lashed together, soil piled on top, and sprigs of morning glory poking through. A woman kneels there, plucking tender leaves into a basket. She tells you they'll be stir-fried with garlic tonight, just as they were last year when the water stayed high for months. Historians still argue whether these floating gardens were an emergency invention or an established seasonal system. But here, the debate doesn't matter. They're dinner. You notice something else. The houses have no fixed address. Families shift their rafts toward neighbors or away from noisy cousins, depending on mood. Water makes you social, one man jokes, or makes you move. He laughs, steering his home with a long bamboo pole as if he's parallel parking in slow motion. The air smells different here. Fresh water mingled with cooking smoke, and the faint tang of fish drying on bamboo racks. Somewhere, someone is pounding rice into flour, the rhythmic thump carrying over the water. A quirky sight catches your eye. A cat balanced on the edge of a canoe, its tail flicking like a metronome as it watches fish dart beneath the surface. You half expect it to jump in. Your guide stops at a house where the family is repairing their bamboo pontoons. You help lash the fresh poles in place, your hands smelling faintly of the river. The bamboo is smooth and cool, and you can feel how tightly each joint is bound. These homes may float gently, but they're built to endure storms. As the sun climbs, the water takes on a deeper blue, reflecting the sky so perfectly it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. You lean back in the canoe, drifting past a stilt house where children leap from the porch into the river with joyous shrieks. One surfaces holding a fat fish, grinning like he's just been handed gold. By afternoon, you've looped back toward your own hut, the boat's bow bumping softly against the dock. You step out, legs wobbling slightly from hours of balancing. The water laps against the stilts, steady and patient. This village doesn't just survive the flood. It rearranges itself to live with it. And you realize that here, survival isn't a stubborn refusal to change. It's the art of moving with the tide. The floodwater brings more than just a change of scenery. It delivers an entire buffet right to the villagers' doorsteps. By dawn, the air is already alive with the soft splash of paddles and the occasional hollow clunk of a wooden trap hitting the water. You join a group of fishers heading out with bundles of reed and bamboo strapped to their boats. Your job today is weaving lop, the funnel-shaped fish traps that have been perfected over generations. You sit cross-legged in a canoe, the reeds cool and flexible in your hands. The trick, one woman tells you, is to make the narrow end just tight enough that a fish can squeeze in, but can't figure out the way out again. A sort of underwater Hotel California. You chuckle, earning a grin from her, and keep weaving until the funnel spiral looks neat and tight. The traps are set along the edges of flooded rice paddies and near the mouths of smaller canals, where the current draws fish through like a conveyor belt. Sliding your arm into the warm, tea-colored water to anchor the trap, you feel the silt swirl between your fingers. Some farmers bait the traps with bits of rice bran. Others swear by the smell of crushed river snails. Historians still argue whether these baiting methods came from trial and error or borrowed traditions from neighboring river cultures. By mid-morning, the first checks begin. You lift a trap to find a flurry of silver inside. Tiny river fish, tails flicking madly. Another trap yields a small catfish and, to your surprise, a disgruntled freshwater turtle. The turtle stares at you like you've interrupted something important, then slides back into the water with an indignant splash. Keeps happening, a fisherman laughs. They think they own the traps. The catch is poured into woven baskets, the fish still wriggling. Some will be cooked fresh for lunch. Others will be cleaned, salted, and laid out to dry on mats under the sun. The smell of drying fish is sharp, almost metallic, but the taste, when grilled over charcoal, is rich and smoky. You're handed a strip to try, and it melts into a burst of salt and umami. There's a quirky local superstition about fishing days. If you hear a kingfisher call in the morning, you must throw back the first fish you catch as payment to the river. You hear one calling now, bright and sharp, so the next catch is gently tipped back into the water. It flicks away in a silver streak, payment made. By noon, your arms are wet to the elbows, and you've learned that fish traps are as much about patience as they are about skill. The villagers check and reset them with a kind of practiced rhythm, moving from one to the next without hurry. In a good flood year, they say, the traps can bring in enough fish to last through the driest months, smoked, fermented into prehawk, or simply salted and stored. As the day winds down, you paddle back through narrow channels lined with water palms. The light has turned honey gold, the river surface dappled with falling frangipani petals. You glance over the boat's edge and see your own reflection beside darting fish shadows. It strikes you how these waters, sometimes feared, sometimes worshipped, are also the most generous of neighbors. By the time you reach the dock, the baskets are heavy. The village already smells of cooking fires, and your fingers are wrinkled from hours in the water. You step onto the planks, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a day when the river has given more than it's taken. The days stretch warm and damp, but the sky begins to change its tone. The clouds, once heavy and constant, drift apart like lazy rafts. You notice the paddy's waterline shrinking, revealing cracks in the mud where dragonflies hover in curious inspection. People start looking up more often, as if scanning for some hidden signal in the pale blue sky. You join a crew walking the canals, bamboo poles in hand, probing the depth. The water is lower than your knees now, the current sluggish and warm. A farmer named Soka mutters, "Too soon for this," flicking a dead leaf from the canal with his pole. Historians still argue whether the Khmer had reliable seasonal forecasting methods or just relied on reading the land. But here, it's clear. These farmers see the warning signs before anyone writes them down. Back in the village, the talk turns to water rationing. The bamboo gates in the irrigation channels are adjusted with the precision of surgeons. Every drop meant to stretch the season a little longer. The beret's surface gleams like beaten bronze under the midday sun. But when you walk the embankment, you see the shoreline retreating by the hand's width each day. A quirky old tradition surfaces. Villagers tie small bundles of green rice stalks to the posts at the canal mouths, so the water won't forget where it's needed most. Whether it's magic or habit, nobody dares skip the ritual. Afternoons become hotter, the air thick with cicada song. You help carry water in clay jars from the shrinking beret to the driest paddies. The jars are heavier than they look, their curved sides slippery in your arms. Each trip feels like a negotiation with the sun, which watches you with a smug, unblinking stare. One evening, as you rest on the dock, you hear an elder recall a drought year when even the fish traps came up empty. Families lived on palm sugar water and whatever wild greens they could gather. And that, she says, pointing at the lowering waterline, was how it started. Her voice is quiet, almost swallowed by the cicadas. The next morning, a shallow haze hangs over the fields. You notice the grass along the paths turning a brittle yellow. The smell of wet earth fades, replaced by the dry, mineral scent of baked mud. You dip your hand into the canal, and the water is warm, almost tepid. You wonder how many more days before the sky remembers its promise. As the sun sinks, you watch the villagers gather again at the gates, adjusting them one last time. The flow into the paddies is reduced to a slow trickle. You feel it then. This isn't just a dry spell. It's the first cautious step into a season that will test everyone here. The drought deepens, and with it comes a subtle shift in the village's pulse. Work in the fields slows. Conversations turn practical. One morning, you join a caravan of farmers pushing small carts piled high with sacks of rice, the season's earlier harvests, carefully guarded until now. It's trading day, and the road ahead leads not to another field, but to a bustling riverside market. The journey is slow, the air shimmering with heat. Dust clings to your legs, and your shirt sticks to your back. But there's a strange optimism in the group. This isn't just about survival, it's about connection. Rice is the currency here, and the market is where it transforms into what the village can't make. Salt, iron tools, pottery, even a bolt of bright indigo cloth that one woman eyes with barely concealed longing. At the market, the noise hits you first. A chorus of vendors calling out prices, bargaining voices overlapping like a chaotic song. You see traders from far-off places, their boats moored along the riverbank, hulls stuffed with goods, wrapped in palm fiber and banana leaves. Historians still argue whether these markets were organized by the state or grew naturally along trade routes. But standing here, it feels like they've existed forever. You help unload a sack of rice, the grains warm from the morning sun. In exchange, a smith hands over a bundle of iron sickle blades, their edges gleaming. Another trader weighs out salt cakes, pale and crumbly, vital for preserving fish and meat through the driest weeks. A quirky trade catches your eye. One farmer swaps a basket of rice for a carved wooden flute. For the children, he says, shrugging. Even in drought, they should have music. It makes you smile. Proof that barter isn't always about bare necessity. You wander deeper into the market, passing stalls selling dried chilies, clay water jars, and bundles of medicinal herbs. The smell is overwhelming. Smoke from roasting fish mingled with the tang of fermented prahok and the sweetness of ripe mangoes. You try a sip of palm wine from a grinning vendor. It's sharp, almost fizzy, and leaves a warm bloom in your chest. Deals are struck quickly. Some farmers hold back part of their rice, wary of what the coming months may demand. Others gamble, trading most of their stock for better tools, betting that improved harvests will repay them later. A trader from the lowlands displays polished bronze bracelets, their surfaces catching the sun. They're expensive in rice terms, yet you see two change hands, proof that beauty still has value, even in hard times. By midday, the carts are lighter, the sacks replaced by bundles wrapped in woven mats. You help push one cart back toward the village, the iron blades clinking softly inside. Along the road, you pass others heading to the market, their faces a mix of hope and calculation. When you finally see the stilt houses on the horizon, the day's heat has drained your legs. But there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing the village now has salt for the fish, tools for the harvest, and maybe even a flute to lift the evenings. Survival isn't just about storing grain. It's about making sure you have the right pieces when the board changes. And here, the board is always changing. The next week begins with an unusual commotion. The sound of drums from the direction of the beret. You follow the crowd gathering near the largest canal, where a royal envoy has arrived, pale silk banners fluttering from his boat. His presence means only one thing: the king's grain tax is due. Farmers emerge from their huts carrying sacks of rice, the rough weave digging into their shoulders. Each sack is tied with a twist of palm fiber and sealed with a clay plug to keep out pests. The grains inside are from the season's early yield, dry, aromatic, and precious. You join the procession toward the granary platform, the air heavy with the scent of stored rice. The royal officials stand beneath a shaded canopy, tallying each contribution with meticulous care. They dip wooden measuring scoops into the sacks, leveling them with a swift scrape before pouring the grain into enormous storage bins. Historians still argue whether these taxes were purely for feeding palace and temple workers, or if they also served as a kind of national grain reserve. Here, nobody argues. They just measure and hand over what's required. A scribe records the amounts on palm leaf manuscripts, the script curling like vines across the smooth surface. You notice his ink-stained fingers and wonder how many such lists fill the archives in the capital. A soldier stands nearby, spear grounded, his gaze polite but firm. A reminder that this isn't a voluntary donation. Between loads, you overhear grumbling from an older farmer. They say the granaries in the city are taller than our houses, yet they still come for more. His wife hushes him quickly, glancing toward the soldier. There's a quiet tension here, a mix of duty and resentment. The process isn't without its quirks. One man pours his rice into the bin, then tosses in a single dried chili. The official frowns, but the man only smiles. So, you remember it came from me. Whether it's a joke or a tiny act of rebellion, you can't tell, but it earns a few muffled chuckles from the waiting line. By midday, the sun is high, and the air smells faintly of heated grain. The royal boat's hull is already heavy with rice sacks, its deck stacked in neat rows like pale bricks. You wonder how long it will be before this rice is steamed in a palace kitchen or offered at a temple altar. When the last sack is measured, the officials bow stiffly and board their boat. The drummer beats a slow rhythm as they push off, the sound fading down the canal. The village exhales in a single, collective sigh, part relief, part calculation of how much is left in their own bins. As you walk back, you pass the community granary. It's smaller, rougher, but it's yours. The scent of rice drifting from the vents feels warmer here, more personal. You realize that while the kings share leaves in boats, the real lifeline stays behind, quietly waiting in the shadows of your own village. The weeks crawl by, and the sky remains a wide, unblinking sheet of blue. The canals shrink to narrow threads, the mud at their edges curling and cracking. You wake one morning to the sound of coughing from the neighboring hut, deep, rattling, and relentless. In the heat, sickness spreads easily. The village healer moves from house to house, a bundle of dried herbs slung over her shoulder. You follow her to deliver water, the clay jar warm against your hip. Inside one hut, she crushes bitter leaves between smooth stones, mixing them into a dark paste she swears will cool the blood. Historians still argue whether these remedies were effective or mostly ritual, but here, belief is part of the cure. Food becomes scarcer. You help measure out the rice ration, just enough to fill a single small bowl per person each day. Families stretch it with boiled greens, tiny dried fish, or thin palm sugar broth. At night, you can hear stomachs rumble through the thin bamboo walls. One afternoon, you join a group walking upriver to check fish traps in the shallows. Most come up empty, just a few finger-length minnows flopping weakly. A fisherman sighs and tosses them back. Not worth the salt to keep them, he mutters. You sense his calculation isn't just about food. It's about conserving every grain of preservation for the weeks ahead. The air itself feels heavier now, carrying a faint sourness from stagnant water. A child runs past you, skin rash blooming across her arms. The healer says it's river itch, made worse when the water stands too long. She smears on a salve, smelling of turmeric and garlic, the scent clinging to your clothes as you leave. A quirky coping habit appears in the evenings. People gather in the shade and tell exaggerated rain stories from past years. Floods so high they floated pigs into the next province. Storms so loud they scared the ghosts out of the trees. Laughter comes easier in the telling, even if the ground underfoot is dust. Still, there's no denying the strain. You watch a farmer grind the last of his dried chilies into powder, sprinkling it over plain rice as if to disguise how little there is. Across the paddy, another family digs at the hard earth for water, the sound of their tools ringing against buried stone. One night, lying on your mat, you hear a low murmur of voices, prayers drifting through the walls. Some are bargaining with the spirits, others simply asking for relief. You close your eyes, picturing the clouds you haven't seen in weeks, and wonder if they've forgotten this place entirely. By now, the drought has made every drop of water a contested treasure. One morning, you hear raised voices from the direction of the main canal. You follow the sound and find a crowd gathered near a fork in the waterway, where a small diversion channel leads toward the temple complex on the far side of the village. The bamboo gates here are open wide, sending a steady flow toward the temple ponds. The farmers stand ankle deep in the dusty canal bed, pointing at the retreating trickle that feeds their own fields. We can't keep the paddies alive if half the water's sent to feed fish in a holy pond, one man shouts. A monk, calm but firm, explains that the temple's reservoirs must remain full. They are sacred, used for ritual bathing and offerings to the gods. If the gods are neglected, he warns, what hope will the fields have? Historians still argue whether Khmer temple water systems were primarily spiritual, or if they also served as public reserves during droughts. Standing here, the lines blur. It's clear the ponds hold both symbolic weight and practical importance. But right now, that importance feels painfully one-sided to the farmers whose seedlings are wilting in cracked mud. You're pulled into the work of tightening the gates toward the temple, just slightly, enough to send a little more toward the fields without shutting off the sacred supply. It's delicate, almost political carpentry. The bamboo creaks under your hands, water swirling faster as the angle changes. The monk watches in silence, then nods once. Not exactly approval, but not objection either. By midday, the temple ponds are still full, their surfaces dotted with pink lotus blooms. Inside the main hall, incense smoke coils lazily toward the rafters, mingling with the scent of warm stone. You help carry buckets of pond water to wash the stone steps, the liquid leaving dark trails on the pale sandstone. The monks chant softly, their voices echoing off the walls, a reminder that even in hardship, the rituals hold steady. Back in the fields, the extra trickle makes a visible difference. Tiny channels darken with moisture, and the youngest rice shoots lift their drooping heads. It's a small victory, but in a season like this, even a fingertip's worth of water feels like a blessing. A quirky detail catches your eye in the temple courtyard. A carved stone spout shaped like a naga serpent, its mouth forever open, though no water flows from it now. An old woman says it once poured year-round, fed by underground channels from the Baray. Maybe it will again, she adds, though her tone is more hope than certainty. As the sun sinks, the argument at the canal feels more like a compromise than a defeat. The temple still gleams in the fading light, its ponds serene, while the fields breathe just a little easier. You walk home between them, aware of how survival here means constantly balancing the sacred with the necessary, and how often they are the same thing. The next morning, you leave the fields behind and follow a narrow path into the shade of the jungle. The air is cooler here, heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of unseen blossoms. You're part of a small foraging party, baskets slung over shoulders, knives tucked at waists. When the rice runs thin, the forest becomes both pantry and pharmacy. Your first stop is a clearing dotted with low, broad-leafed plants. A farmer kneels, working his hands into the soil, and pulls up a knobby root the color of faded gold. Wild turmeric, he says, brushing off the dirt. Keeps the belly strong. He slices a piece with his knife, the cut releasing a sharp, earthy perfume that lingers on your fingers. Farther in, someone points out a vine with clusters of pale flowers. The blossoms will be boiled into a bitter tea, said to help with fevers. Historians still argue whether the Khmer kept formal records of such plant knowledge, or if it was passed entirely by memory. But here, the instructions flow like everyday conversation. When to harvest, how long to dry, which leaves to avoid, unless you enjoy days of regretting your choices. A quirky discovery comes when a young boy leads you to a hollow tree buzzing softly. He reaches in with bare hands and pulls out a chunk of wild honeycomb, golden and dripping. For the children first, he says solemnly, breaking off a piece for you anyway. The honey is warm from the sun, floral and almost smoky from the wood. You lick your fingers clean, already planning to stash some away for later. The deeper you go, the more the forest reveals. Mushrooms shaped like tiny parasols, tender shoots of bamboo for soup, and a patch of wild ginger that perfumes the air when you dig it up. There's an unspoken urgency to the gathering. Baskets fill quickly, and no one lingers in one place too long. The jungle is generous, but it's also watchful, and you feel the eyes of creatures you can't see. By midday, you stop beside a stream to wash your hands and cool your feet. The water is icy, a shock after the sticky heat of the forest. One man pulls out a small woven trap and sets it downstream, explaining that the narrow current here sometimes catches river shrimp. Good in soup, he says with a grin, if the fish haven't told them to hide. When you emerge from the jungle, the baskets are heavy and fragrant. The village smells of cooking fires, and soon the roots, greens, and honey will join the day's meal. You realize that in a place where the sky can forget to rain, the forest remembers enough to keep people alive, if you know how to ask. The first clouds in weeks appear one morning, not the towering monsoon giants you've been longing for, but thin wisps teasing the sky. They drift by without spilling a single drop. Still, the sight stirs the village into action. We fix now, Dara tells you, handing you a shovel, before the real water comes. The work is spread along the lifelines, the canals, the dikes, the bamboo gates. You follow a crew to a section of the main dike where the earth has split into long, jagged cracks. Standing there, you can almost hear the land thirsting. The farmers set to work, shoveling fresh mud into the gaps, their feet sinking deep with each step. You join them, the sun quickly slicking your back with sweat. Nearby, others are clearing the canals of choking weeds. Men with long-handled rakes pull mats of green from the water, tossing them onto the bank where they steam in the heat. The smell is sharp and vegetal, like boiled spinach mixed with river mud. Historians still argue whether the Khmer maintained these works year-round or in frantic bursts before the rainy season, but this feels very much like the latter, a sprint before the sky changes its mind. A quirky innovation catches your eye. A boy with a bundle of thorny branches tied to a rope drags it along the canal floor to stir up silt and flush out debris. Fish don't like it either, he says proudly, so they move downstream where we can catch them. Multitasking, Khmer style. Midday brings the hardest job, resetting a warped bamboo gate. The frame has bent under last year's flood, and the water won't flow evenly unless it's fixed. You help lift it from its hinges, your hands slick from both mud and the sweat dripping down your arms. The bamboo creaks ominously, but it holds as you wedge it into a straighter position and bind it with fresh rattan strips. By late afternoon, the repairs begin to take shape. The dike is patched, the canals run clearer, and the gates creak open and shut without sticking. You stand on the bank, wiping your face, and imagine the coming rain rushing through these channels like 1,000 silver snakes. Before heading back, the crew walks the length of the canal, stamping down loose earth and checking for leaks. The sun is low, casting long shadows over the water. Someone calls out a reminder. Do this right, and the rain can't surprise you. You can't help thinking that here, survival means treating water not as an enemy or a friend, but as a very unpredictable guest, and making sure the guest room is always ready. That evening, the work slows, and the village gathers around small cooking fires. You sit cross-legged near one where an old man is mending a fishing net by the glow of the embers. Beyond the circle of light, the jungle hums, a layered chorus of frogs, crickets, and the occasional splash from the canal. Someone passes you a clay cup of warm palm sugar tea, sweet and earthy, and the stories begin. The elders spoke in the unhurried cadence of people who expect to be listened to. Tonight's tales all revolve around water, its moods, its tricks, its grudges. One woman recalls a flood so fierce it carried away an entire ox cart, returning it weeks later on the opposite bank of the river, perfectly upright, as if it had been parked there on purpose. The group chuckles, though a few cross themselves discreetly. A man with a voice like creaking timber leans forward, his eyes catching the firelight. He tells of the rain caller, a wandering monk who supposedly knew the chance that could draw storms from an empty sky. He came only when called, the man says, and left before anyone could thank him. Historians still argue whether such figures were real people, spiritual specialists, or just metaphors for seasonal change. But here, the monk is remembered as vividly as if he'd left yesterday. A quirky story comes from Dara, who swears that during one particularly long dry spell, a group of boys painted fake rain clouds on palm leaves and stuck them to the temple roof to trick the sky. Whether it worked is debatable, but he insists the rains came 2 days later. The group laughs, the sound rolling easily into the night air. Between stories, the fire pops, sending up tiny sparks that drift and fade. Shadows shift on the woven bamboo walls of nearby houses. You feel the heat on your face and the cool edge of the evening on your back, a reminder of how narrow the band between comfort and discomfort can be here. The conversation drifts toward the future, the unpredictable months ahead. Some voices carry hope, others the weary acceptance that the cycle will do as it pleases. You sip the last of your tea, the sweetness clinging to your tongue, and listen until the words blur into the steady nighttime chorus. When you finally rise, your legs are stiff, and the path to your hut is lit only by the moon's pale light. The stories still echo in your ears, as if the water itself is whispering them along the canal, and you suspect they'll be told again next season, altered just enough to fit whatever the sky decides to do. The day begins with a bruise-colored sky, low and restless. The air tastes metallic, and every hair on your arms seems to stand at attention. By mid-morning, the wind sharpens, rattling the palm fronds until they hiss like boiling oil. You've seen storms before, but this one feels impatient, like it wants to arrive all at once. It starts with a single sheet of rain, slamming down so hard the river seems to leap in surprise. Then the sound swallows everything. The hiss of water on water, the drumming on roofs, the roar against the trees. You're knee-deep in your stilt house, bailing water into buckets, when lightning flashes close enough to bleach the inside of your eyelids. The crack that follows makes your ribs jump. The patties vanish under a swelling brown expanse. The canals, so carefully repaired, now rush like unleashed animals. A bamboo gate downstream gives way with a splintering crack, sending a surge into a cluster of patties until the water swirls over their banks. Historians still argue whether the Khmer could fully control such storms with their engineering, but watching this chaos, it's clear. Sometimes the sky simply wins. In the distance, you spot a neighbor's raft breaking free from its moorings. You and Dara wade out, water pushing hard against your legs, and catch the rope just before it drifts toward the faster current. A child peers over the raft's edge, clutching a clay jar like it's a treasure chest. Cooking oil, she explains solemnly, as if no storm could be survived without it. Thunder rolls again, closer this time, and the wind drives sheets of rain sideways. You retreat to the house, where water seeps through the bamboo floorboards in tiny persistent streams. A quirky moment comes when a duck, clearly displeased, waddles right in through the open doorway, shakes itself off, and settles on a dry mat like it owns the place. No one argues. It's too wet to evict a guest. By late afternoon, the rain begins to lose its fury, though the water level still creeps upward. The sky lightens from charcoal to dull silver, and the wind drops to a tired sigh. Outside, the village looks like it has been picked up, shaken, and set back down at a slightly different angle. When you step out, the air smells of churned mud and crushed leaves. The repaired dikes mostly held, though the fields will need draining before the rice drowns. Boats move slowly between houses, checking on neighbors, hauling stray baskets, and rescuing the occasional wayward chicken. That night, the croak of frogs is so loud it almost drowns out the dripping from the eaves. You lie awake on your mat, the memory of the storm still humming in your bones, and wonder if the next one will give you more warning or less. The storm leaves behind a strange stillness, as if the land is catching its breath. But the rice doesn't wait. Within days, the water in the paddies settles into a glassy calm, and the plants surge upward, their stalks thickening, heads heavy with grain. It's harvest time. You step into the fields at dawn, the mist clinging low and cool around your ankles. In one hand, you carry a curved iron sickle, its edge honed sharp enough to whisper through a stem with barely a tug. All around you, farmers bend and slice in an unbroken rhythm, cut, gather, bind. The air fills with the soft rustle of stalks and the faint, grassy scent of fresh-cut rice. Bundles are tied with strips of straw and stacked in neat conical piles, golden against the muddy earth. A boy trots past with an armful almost as big as he is, grinning through the effort. "For the granary," he calls. His bare feet leave quick prints in the damp soil before the water closes over them. Historians still argue whether Khmer farmers time their harvests with lunar cycles or purely by the grain's ripeness. Here, the test is tactile. A head of rice is rubbed between the palms. If the grains fall free with a dry whisper, it's ready. At midday, the work shifts to threshing. You watch as stalks are beaten against a wooden frame, the grains raining down in a pale shower. The sound is rhythmic, almost musical. Chaff floats into the air, catching the sunlight like tiny drifting moths. A quirky moment comes when Dara flips his sickle into the ground blade first, and claims it's resting after a long morning. Nobody questions him. Everyone is too busy winnowing, tossing grain high, so the breeze carries away the husks. By late afternoon, the conical stacks have multiplied across the field like a gathering of small golden temples. The granary fills, its interior cool and dark, the scent of stored grain already thick inside. You help hoist the last sack up the ladder, your arms trembling from the weight, and tie it off with a knot so tight, even the fattest rat would have trouble finding a way in. The day ends with a shared meal right there in the field. Grilled fish, sticky rice, and a pot of palm sugar tea still warm from the fire. Laughter drifts upward with the smoke, and the tiredness in your muscles feels different now, sweeter somehow. Walking home under a bruised purple sunset, you glance back at the fields. They're stripped bare now, but they hum with the promise of the next cycle. For tonight, though, the work is done, and the village can sleep with the comfort of full granaries. The season's bounty doesn't erase the truth everyone here knows. The cycles can turn cruel again without warning. This year, the storms came late, but not too late. The droughts long, but not fatal. Next year could be different. And for some families, the risks have grown too heavy to bear. You watch as a cluster of households begins their quiet preparations to leave. Bamboo poles are lashed into bundles, mats rolled, clay jars wrapped in woven reed for the journey. The narrow boats they'll use are lined up along the canal, their hulls patched with fresh resin. The air smells faintly of smoke from the last cooking fires they'll light here. Dara explains in a low voice that they're heading toward land with more predictable water, following relatives who left seasons ago. Easier soil, they say. Better trade roads. His tone makes it clear this isn't a choice made lightly. It's an uprooting. You help one family load their boat. Sacks of rice, baskets of palm sugar, a few iron tools, and a small clay pot filled with water from the village's own beret. For luck, the mother says. The children are strangely quiet, clutching carved wooden toys and a single kitten that mews in protest at every bump. Historians still argue whether such migrations were seasonal adjustments or permanent resettlements. Watching the way the departing families glance back at the stilt houses, you suspect it's a little of both. People leaving with the hope they'll return, knowing they probably won't. A quirky sight lightens the mood. One man insists on strapping his prized rooster to the bow of his boat, claiming it will announce our arrival with authority. The bird seems unconvinced, but it sits there like a feathered figurehead as the boat drifts from the dock. By midday, the leaving boats are small shapes on the horizon, slipping between the palms until they vanish. The village feels larger and quieter at once. You walk past the now empty houses, their ladders pulled up, the wind whispering through the gaps in their bamboo walls. That evening, you sit by the canal and watch the last light ripple across the water. The departing families have taken a piece of the village's rhythm with them, but the rest will stay, tending the paddies, mending the canals, planting the next cycle in the same stubborn mud. The work doesn't stop just because the cast changes. You lean back, the air cooling as the first stars appear, and listen to the water moving under the stilts. It sounds like a story still being told, one you've been part of, one you'll carry whether you stay or go. The cycles of rain and drought still play out in your mind, but here in the dark, the urgency softens. You imagine the paddies glowing green again under the monsoon's return, the beret brimming like a second sky laid on the earth. The heat, the mud, the arguments at the canals, all of it feels distant now, like ripples fading on still water. Your breathing slows with the villages. Somewhere, a night bird calls once, twice, then falls silent. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and cooling fires. You picture the families who left, already drifting down some new canal, and those who remain, tucking in under mosquito nets. In this softened moment, the water is neither enemy nor savior, just part of the night's steady heartbeat. You feel it in the hush between sounds, in the way the starlight wavers on the canal's surface. Even the restless wind has quieted, slipping away into the trees. You let the images fade, the crack of thunder over a flooded field, the shimmer of rice under the morning sun, the pale lotus floating in the temple pond. Each dissolves like mist, leaving only the rhythm of your breath and the slow lap of water against wood. The story settles into a whisper, the kind that stays with you long after it's told. And as your eyes grow heavy, you sink into that quiet, carrying the knowledge that life here, like the water, always finds a way forward.